everything I experienced is real. I was a skeptic, as I said originally. I was a very, very hard sell. It took me years before I would accept the whole paranormal, or they call it the woo aspect of it. But when I finally experienced enough things that I could no longer deny it, it was real, it was happening. Hello everyone, my name is Chuck Jacobs, and I'm a Squatcher. To tell you a little bit about myself, I'm 75 years old. I'm a retired fire chief, and with about 44 years in the fire service. After I retired, I was looking for stuff that interested me, and I have a wide variety of interests. I've always been interested in fringy subjects. I've always been interested in ghosts and the paranormal and flying saucers and all that kind of thing. But after I retired, I finally had the time to actually devote for that. So I got started on my Bigfoot Odyssey, if you will. I got started in that around when the TV show Finding Bigfoot came out in 2009. It seemed like kind of an interesting lark, and I kind of watched that. And I spent quite a bit of time out in the woods. I had 9 Jeeps over my lifetime, and I was a Jeeper, and I spent a lot of time just out going places in my Jeep. And so this seemed like just another good reason to get out in the woods. And so anyway, I started wondering if it was true. I was skeptical. My whole life I've been kind of a nuts and bolts guy, and if it breaks, you weld it. And I didn't think there could possibly, that Bigfoot could possibly be real. So I was the ultimate skeptic. But I also was open-minded. And so I thought it was just a good excuse to get out in the woods. So I started doing my research, and I came upon the BFRO website, and I found out that where I lived, which by the way, I live in a little town called Payson in the mountains of central Arizona, just underneath the Mogollon Rim, and found out that area was considered a hot spot. So I thought, oh, cool, that'll be something I can do. So I went out and I started learning what I could, and I started researching and trying to figure out, and of course I was looking for undiscovered apes at that time. Well, I picked an area up on top of the Mogollon Rim that I thought had everything that I was told that Sasquatch the animal would need. And that was a good supply of fresh water, an ample food supply, plenty of cover to hide, and someplace where they wouldn't be bothered by the likes of us. So I picked an area that I thought would work. I made 3 day trips up there to learn the area very, very clearly. And so I knew where the canyons went. I knew the vegetation. Then I decided it was time to go do something in the dark. So I talked to another old retired fire guy friend of mine who's pretty low maintenance in the woods. I talked him into going with me. And we went up and we spent an afternoon checking to make sure we were the only people in the area, that there were no other campers. And then we picked a spot that we thought would be a good spot. And we set up camp for the night. And I didn't know anything. So my whole thought was that I was just going to sit and listen and see if I heard anything. Well, about 9:30 that night, out of nowhere, got a wood knock. Now, there's absolutely nothing else out there that would make that noise. About 20 minutes later, we got a vocalization. And between those 2 things, that changed my life forever and started me on the road that I'm at now. I've been doing this now for about 13 years. The first 6 years of it, I was up looking for undiscovered apes. And I was out banging on trees and howling in the dark and running around with the night vision trying to find something. And I had a relative degree of success. I had them approach me. I had them breaking sticks. I got screamed at. But I thought there had to be something more to that. So after about 6 years, I started paying attention to what a group out of the Pacific Northwest was doing. And they weren't looking for undiscovered apes, or like we say, they were looking for monkeys. They were looking for people. And so I changed my whole research methodology. And I went out there and I started looking for people. And everything changed overnight. I learned about zapping. I had my first sighting. I learned about MindSpeak, and I started having MindSpeak. Now we're sitting 13 years later. There's a small group of us. It's kind of an unofficial group, and we all go out together. Not always all of us, but we go out either by ourselves or with some of our group, and we have had some of the most incredible experiences you can possibly imagine. What we found out, and I guess the best way to do it is I do public presentations on this, and I tell people that I want to tell them 3 things. Number 1, the Bigfoot people are real. Sasquatch people are real. They are just as real as you and I. Number 2, they are not some kind of an undiscovered ape. They're a people. They operate a lot like a First Nations Indian tribe. The elders are in charge. They have language, they have names, they have families, they have society, they have culture. Their lifespan is approximately 3 times ours, which means that the ones of the elders now, they were adults when we white Anglo-Europeans first came to the area. We are the gophers in their yard. We moved into their home and we started busting up the furniture, building our towns and our roads and our industrial facilities and our garbage dumps. So a lot of the elders don't like us much, and they move into very, very remote areas so they don't have to deal with us. And what's the number 3 thing? Even though they're a people, they are not people like us. They're a different kind of people. They're not the same type of life form that we are. And what that means is that they routinely can do things that we consider to be impossible. One of the things they do is they manipulate light so that we cannot see them. If you stop and think about it, it's pretty easy to hide when you're invisible. But in order for us to be able to see them, they actually have to do something. We think they slow down their vibrational intensity, but we're not 100% sure that's right. The other thing they can do is they can move incredibly fast through very heavy brush without making a sound. And by fast, I mean 40 miles an hour. We've seen them do it. They leave tracks when they want to. They make noise when they want to. You will see them at this time and place of their choosing. They communicate with us most often by MindSpeak. And what's MindSpeak? It's just another name for telepathy. The interesting thing about MindSpeak is that nobody can prove that you're hearing it, but then again, you can't prove to anybody that you are either. So it's very easy for somebody to just write you off, or if they experience it themselves, it's very easy for them just to kind of shake their head and say, where did that thought come from? And that happens a lot, way more than you might imagine. So those are my 3 things that I tell everybody. Once you know that they're there, they have a term for that. And the term they use for that is that you are awake. And once that you are awake to the fact that they even exist, and that they're all around us and they're everywhere. Once that you're awake, at that point, then it's time for you to start building trust with them. And trust and respect is everything. Once they decide that they can trust you, you're not going to try to shine a light at them. You're not going to try to take their picture. They do not like cameras. It has something to do with their spiritual beliefs. Once they decide that you're not going to try to take their picture, you're not going to try to shine a bright light at them, you're not going to try to hurt one. We call that no cameras, no lights, no guns. At that point, they start trusting you. And once they start trusting you, they will accept you and they will tag you. And once you're tagged, and these are terms they use, once you're tagged, no matter where you go, they know who you are. The local ones will know who you are. I've tested that theory in 6 Western states and found it to be true. I had contact with one up in Montana, and she knew that I was who I said I was. Very, very interesting. I have now my list on my phone of the ones that I have met and know by name is right around 100 individuals. Names, they use 3 names. They have their formal name, they have their nickname that their family calls them, and then they have a name that they might just pick out of the sky when they're dealing with you, just because it's an easy name for you to remember. I thought that was pretty unusual at first, but then I got to thinking, well, my given name is Charles. Everybody calls me Chuck, and my wife calls me Honey when she's not calling me other things. So basically, we do the same thing. To give you an example of some of the names, I'm familiar with one whose nickname that they refer to him, and that's the name that his family group refers to him, and they call him fullback. I've never seen him, but I assume that's because the big wide shoulders probably resemble a football player in pads. I had another one in New Mexico. When I asked him what his name was, he told me that his name was Tom. I don't for a minute think that his name is really Tom. I think that was what he told me, just so that I have something easy to remember, so that I knew what I could call him. And I had contact with him over 3 different nights in a little town in New Mexico. We have several research locations we go to. Sometimes we go by ourselves, but more often than not, we'll go at least 2 of us. And the reason for that is not so much for safety, because let's face it, we've sat out in the dark so much. If these were the bloodthirsty monsters that some people would have you believe, I'd have been dead a long time ago. But no, they're very loving, they're very spiritual people. The reason why we go out with more than one of us, quite simply, is for confirmation. Because if we see something or we hear something and more than one of us experiences it, that way we know it's not just us and making it up somehow in our head. We've obviously been accused of that. I've got people that have known me for 30 years that absolutely think that I'm Looney Tunes and that they're going to come haul me away sometime. I spent 44 years in the fire service, and 34 of that I was a responder. And then eventually I got into fire prevention and fire education, teaching at community college level. But the fire business it's a pretty down-to-earth business, and everything is kind of black and white. The bell rings, you climb on the truck, you go over to wherever the emergency is happening, and you try to take care of the emergency. Whether that means squirting water on the fire, or that means taking care of somebody that has a heart attack, or getting somebody out of a wrecked car, whatever it takes, you know how to do it. But it's pretty black and white. I use the term when it breaks, you weld it. Well, if you go over there and you do what you got to do to make it better. Now, firefighters aren't magicians. They can't unburn things. They can't bring the dead back from the life, although occasionally paramedics do that. They can't push the explosion back in the tank. But our job was always to go and make things better, and it's pretty much a hands-on thing, and it doesn't fit in with some of the warm and fuzzy beliefs and some of the paranormal stuff, because what you deal with is not paranormal, it's there every day. So it took me a long time to come around to the possibility that what I was experiencing could be real. And I denied it in my own head for a long time before finally I had enough experiences under my belt. We use the term connect the dots. Every experience we had was a dot. And when you get enough dots and you connect enough dots, the picture starts becoming clearer. And I'm still receiving dots to this day, and the picture becomes clearer every time I learn something new. Being a firefighter, I thought pretty much that I knew how the world worked and how everything worked. I went through a radical change when I started understanding that the Sasquatch people were real and they were out there, because that was totally against everything I had believed my whole life. None of this stuff was possible, but here, what was I doing? I was sitting out in the middle of the dark night, and I was seeing and I was experiencing the impossible. And it took me quite a while to finally accept that. I finally did. My partner accepted it long before I did, and finally I just threw up my hands and surrendered to it. It was real, and there's no way I could deny it. There was no way I could rationalize it. So where can they be found? The short answer, folks, is everywhere, around the world. If you go to China, they're called the Aren. If you go to Russia, they're called the Almas or the Almasti. Down in the Himalayas, of course, they're the Yeti. If you go down to the jungles of Brazil, they're called the Mapinguari. If you go down to the Southeast Asia, they're called the Arang Pendek. If you go to Australia, they're called the Yowie. There are names for them everywhere, but if you come back to it, the description is usually pretty close to the same. If you could manipulate light so that you could be invisible to people, it's pretty darn easy to hide. And we don't know how many of them there are. We theorize that there may be as many of them as there are of us. We don't know that. We have no way of telling that. They haven't told us that. How do we communicate with them? Normally it is by mind speak. They do have the capability when they're in their full solid form, and they can change forms. They don't have to obey our laws of physics. They have laws of physics of their own. But when they're in their full solid form, they have vocal cords, but they're different than ours. Their speech is very, very low and very guttural. And they talk very fast, and when there's a group of them, they'll all be talking at the same time. And somehow they manage to sort that out. It makes it very difficult for us to follow what they're saying. We know a few words in their language, but we don't know enough. Their language, by the way, is like our language. It includes a lot of words that are picked up from other languages, from other human languages. They have words in their language that are picked up from the various Native American dialects. There's some Navajo words. There's some, we know one of our people has been named and was given a name that was a Great Lakes Indian term. There's Spanish words in there. Is there Spanish words in our language? Sure. Siesta, mañana, there's a lot of Spanish words that have found their way into the English language. It's the same thing with their language. So when they normally, if they talk to us verbally, and they have, what they normally do is they'll normally only say 2 or 3 words. And that's not for their benefit, it's for ours. Now they are bigger, stronger, faster, and smarter than we are. Their intellect is a lot broader than ours. We think we are the absolute apex species on the planet. Folks, I'm telling you, we're not. Okay, as I said before, we're kind of like the gophers in their yard. And we go in there, we make a heck of a mess, and they got to try to stay out of our way. And they, for the most part, they put up with us. Occasionally they rebel. We've actually had them at times tell us they don't want us to record audio. We've also had them, I used to run a dash cam in my van, and it plugged in the cigarette lighter. And one of the places that we go that we nicknamed Crazy Town because of all the stuff that's happened there, I pulled in there one afternoon and I forgot to unplug my dash cam. And so about 3 or 4 hours later, I went back to get something out of the van and I saw the little LED light on, so I knew I'd unplugged. And so I unplugged it. And a little bit later, they came and asked us about that. They expressed concern that we had the camera running. So after I told them it was an accident, I forgot to unplug it. And we would never, we made them a promise. We promised them that we would never harm them. We would never try to take their picture. We would never try to shine a bright light on them. We asked them one time about the camera thing and why they were so dead set against cameras. And we were told that they had rules against that. And so I asked them, I said, well, who made those rules? And we were told the Creator. Well, I'm certainly not going to argue with that. There are certain peoples who believe that if you take a picture with their camera, take a picture of them with a camera, it somehow captures their soul or something. I don't know if this is part of their belief in that regard or what the reasoning is, but they absolutely do not want to have anything to do with cameras. That doesn't mean that they're infallible. Every once in a while, one of them will get caught on a camera. Or once in a while, the Patterson-Gimlin film being a good example, the Patterson-Gimlin film, that one deliberately allowed herself to be seen for some kind of a reason. And there's all kinds of speculation about what those reasons are. We don't have time to go into those stories here. I guess a good story is we have a place that we routinely go to that we've nicknamed Hilltop. And Squatchers will have their favorite place that they like to go. And they're kind of like fishermen. They'll tell you what lake they went to, but they won't tell you exactly where their fishing spot is. The reality is that for the most part, it doesn't make any difference because these things range far and wide. And so you don't have to go to the exact same spot because they move around. And but anyway, the spot we call Hilltop. One night, one of our guys had seen a movement in the trees and thought it was pretty sure that they'd seen one, but not close, not enough that you could, swear on the Bible and court of law that was what it was. Well, my partner and I were sitting out. We had 3 of us there, and one guy had gone to bed. And the partner and I were sitting out, and in order to keep track of the landmarks around when you're sitting in the dark, and the only thing you can navigate by is the starlight in the sky, well, you make nicknames for landmarks. And where we sit up there at Hilltop, we have 2 large pine trees that we nicknamed the goalposts. And we have a lot of activity right around where the goalposts are. And so my partner and I are sitting there, and it's not really that late, maybe 10 o'clock at night. And all of a sudden, I see one plain as day walking left to right between the goalposts. And I said to my partner, I said, between the goalposts, I see it. And we both watched this individual walk from left to right, probably a total of 6 or 7 steps before it went behind some bushes where we couldn't see the individual anymore. So I called out, and I called out verbally. I said, we can see you over there. What's your name? And the name we got back, I thought that the name that I got back was Wren, like the bird, a wren. And so I came back and I said, was that Wren? And came back and clarified, Wren. She just said it very fast. And it sounded like a female in mind speak. And so I said, are you male or female? Female. So, can you tell me how old you are? Old. Very sarcastic. Old. Well, we've seen Rayanne a number of times, and we've had contact with her a number of times up there. One of the other ones later on told us that she's 90, which fits right into the lifespan 3 times as long as ours that we've been told. One of our people had mind speak with her one night and said, I'd certainly like to see you. Is there any way that I can actually see you? And she came back and she told him, I'm not allowed. They have rules. They're not allowed to violate those rules. Does that mean they don't always do that? No, every once in a while they do. The young ones, once in a while, we'll get the young ones, and we try not to get them in trouble. We don't want to get them in trouble. We had little ones one time, and we said, we don't want to get you in trouble, but we'd sure like to talk to you. And had a little one come back and say, we can say hi. And just the cutest darn thing. And we've had the little ones come, and we leave chairs out. And we had little ones come cloaked and come sit next to us. And how do we know they're there? Because it's a distortion. You can see the distortion. You train yourself to look for that. If any of you have ever watched the movie Predator, it's very, very similar to that. In that movie, and there's an alien that can somehow mask his appearance to the point where he's kind of a shimmering image, if you will. And we've seen them in that shimmering image form. We call it cloaked, and just because that's the term everybody uses. We don't particularly like that term, but we use it because everybody identifies with that. But we've seen them in that shimmering image form more times than we can count. You don't see them in the full solid form very often. But it's very, very common to see them in shimmering image form. And once you train yourself to look for that, they're actually pretty easy to see. When do we see them? We see them right at dusk. We call it the witching hour, between the time the sun goes down and it gets dark out. And there's a time when you can still see pretty good, and that's the time they start coming around. In our experience, we don't have to stay up until 1, 2 in the morning. Usually they'll come around and they'll be around us for an hour and a half, and then they go do whatever they do, and they're done with us for the night. Sometimes they'll come right out and they'll tell us, go to bed. But a lot of times what they'll do is they'll just make us tired and cold. Now, a lot of times when you're up in the mountains at night, it gets cold, especially if you're sitting still and not moving around. But you can tell, we all bundle up, we wear Arctic gear at night, and that kind of thing. But all of a sudden, when we're chilled to the bone, in spite of everything that we're wearing, and all of us at the same time, like somebody flipped a switch, we know that that's them telling us that they want us to go to bed. Now, sometimes we'll ask them, will you please stop doing that? Will you please make us warm again? And sometimes they'll do that. But sometimes that's just their way of telling us they want us to go to bed. What do they do when we go to bed? Man, likely as not, they come right into our camp. We'll hear the footsteps. Sometimes we'll hear them messing around, looking at stuff on our table. We've had them open and close the ice chest. We've left stuff out for them. Gifting is a big thing. Some Squatchers are really big into gifting, and we tried that for a while. But if you're dealing with somebody with the mental capacity of them, you don't want to insult them by thinking that you're going to leave them a donut and everything's going to be wonderful. All right, that's insulting to them. Now, what we still do though is we'll bring the pastries for their little ones. And a lot of times what we use are the little white powdered sugar donuts. So why do we use those, you might ask? It's pretty simple. If you leave those out, and if a critter, a squirrel, a skunk, a bird, something like that, goes and gets them, they'll chew them up right there and leave a heck of a mess. We can't hardly eat them without making a heck of a mess. If it's one of our forest friends that come and get them, they have an opposable thumb. They just pick it up and it's gone. And that does two things. Number one is the little young ones, especially at the place we call Crazy Town, they like them. And then we can tell when they just disappear and there's not a bunch of crumbs on the stump, or there's not a bunch of crumbs on the ground underneath the stump, then we know it wasn't another animal that got them. We know it was one of them. And they just picked it up and walked off with it, popped it in their mouth just like we do. You know, the area where I live up here, it's called the Mogollon Rim. And what it is, it's the south edge of the Colorado Plateau, and it's about a 1,000-foot cliff face. And down here in town, we're at about 5,000-foot elevation. The top of the Mogollon Rim is just under 8,000 feet. And what that means is that the weather's a lot different up there than it is down here. But what it also means is that we're the closest high mountain recreation area to Metro Phoenix, and Metro Phoenix has 4 million people. And what that means is that there's very, very heavy camping presence up here on weekends, especially the holiday weekends. People come up here from the city and they want to go camping. And so they go up there and they set up their tent and they start their campfire and they play their music loud and they have their Coleman lantern on and they're about 2/3 of the way through their third six-pack. And are they paying attention to their surroundings? No, they're not. But what's happening there is the Sasquatch people are just out of range of their light, and they're watching every movement they make. They put camp watchers on virtually every camp. There's always a camp watcher, and they're paying attention to what you're doing. Well, if people are not being good stewards of the land, as many of the city people aren't, you know, that doesn't make our species look particularly good. But that's how they learn about us. Remember, they don't have internet. They don't have TV, although I've actually had them standing outside my travel trailer watching movies through the back window. They've told us they're doing that. So they do occasionally do that. But but all these people are totally oblivious to what's going on around them. There's one particular area up there where one family group has probably a group of teenagers, and they have one that we refer to as a camp screamer. And what that individual does, and we don't know if it's a young male or young female, we don't know which, but they'll come into a camp at 3 o'clock in the morning, and they'll let loose with a loud, blood-curdling scream and wake the whole camp up like some kind of a 30-foot tall woman being tortured, and scare the living daylights out of all the campers. They have great fun doing that. Their young people are a lot like our young people. Long-distance hikers, a lot of them will tell stories about hearing rustling in the brush on either side of them when they're hiking, sticks breaking, pine cones being thrown at them. Little story I will tell you is there was 2 of our female researchers, and both of them fit that description. They were walking in an area, and I'd been up there camping with them the previous couple of nights, and but then I had to come back to town because I was still working at the college and I had a class to teach. And so I left and went back home, and they went to check out an area where they had been before, but we had heard about it, and so they went to look at it, and they were walking down a closed road, and all of a sudden they started getting the bushes being shook on both sides of them. Well, the one lady she was actually retired law enforcement. She wasn't scared of the devil himself, but it scared her. And so they turned around, and they were about half a mile or so from their vehicle, and so they started walking back, trying to act like they weren't scared, and they were paralleled, one on each side of them, all the way back to their vehicle. Well, they got back to the vehicle, and then they got braver, and so they decided to leave gifts out, and they had some granola bars. And so they left 4 granola bars on a log, and when they laid the 4th one down, the one lady held it up, and she talked to them. She said, "These are for you. We're your friends. We're leaving these for you." And the minute she said that, all of a sudden they got bombarded with little pieces of wood and pine cones. We're getting thrown at them from all directions. I had no idea how many of them were actually there doing that. But of course, then they left. Well, as soon as they got to a location where they had cell signal, they called me. And I was done teaching my class. I was actually home eating lunch, and they said, "You'll never guess what happened." And they had me on speakerphone, and they're all excited. So I said, "Well, you know, I'll meet you up there." So I grabbed a friend of mine, and we went jetting up there. So they told me where this had happened at, and they were in the process of breaking camp. They both had to go home. And so my friend and I went back over there, and with some difficulty, we lost the trail once, but then we figured out where they were meant us to go, and we found the spot. And all the granola bars were gone, but I actually did find one granola bar wrapper, and it had been pulled open from the sides. Now, any of us that opens a granola bar, we're going to open it from the end. This was pulled open side to side, and the granola bar, of course, was gone. Didn't find anything else. None of the other wrappers were there. But that one wrapper was kind of left there for us to find. And I carry that around with me to this day. So where we're located right now is we're located in the Rim Country Museum in Payson, Arizona. And part of the local lore here in the Payson area is what we call the Mogollon Monster. So what is the Mogollon Monster? Well, the story dates back to during the war, during 1944-45, and there was a group of Boy Scouts that had hiked down into a remote area, and what they went down there for is they went down there to change the punch tape on a stream measuring station. And in those days, of course, they had a roll of paper, and it would punch and tell you what the level of the stream would be, and every so often somebody would have to go down there and change that roll of paper. So that's what they went down there to do. But they were going to make an overnighter out of it. Well, as they were hiking down, a couple of the Boy Scouts caught glimpses of what they thought was another person down there at a distance. And a person dressed in dark clothing, and they just caught glimpses of them here and there. But after they all got set up camp and had dinner and settled in for the night in their sleeping bags, all of a sudden, a large, bipedal, hair-covered, foul-smelling creature comes storming into their camp, screaming at the top of his lungs, scared the living daylights out of all of them, just terrorized them, broke into their food, spilled their pancake flour, ate their food, and just in general, they all thought they were going to die. But basically, after doing that, it stormed out of the camp and ended up not hurting anybody. Well, the next morning, of course, as soon as it became daylight, they were scared to death. They never slept the rest of the night. So as soon as they had enough light, they packed up and got out of there. And so when they came back to town, they told their story about this creature. They didn't know who it was or what it was. Well, the term, this happened in 1944 or 45. There's an argument over which year it was. But the term Bigfoot hadn't been invented yet. The locals had never heard of the term Sasquatch. That was invented in 1927 up in British Columbia, and that was an Anglicization of the Salish Indian word Sasquatch, which basically means wild man. So they hadn't heard the term Sasquatch. The term that they used here, the very, very few times that somebody actually seen one, they referred to them as mountain apes. But after this incident, they coined the term the Mogollon Monster. So the Mogollon Monster the Mogollon monster, is the local version of Sasquatch. And you know, obviously we've learned that they're not really a monster. This one was just probably a young one having fun, terrorizing the humans. Were there encounters in the early days here? Yeah, there were. One of the reasons when I first started doing this, one of the reasons why I decided to go public on what I was doing was because I wanted to start collecting stories. And I knew that nobody was going to tell me their story unless they knew I wanted to hear it. So I went public about what I was doing, and sure enough, I picked up a few stories, not as many as you would think. And I think the reason behind that is that in the late 1870s, when we first white Anglo-Europeans started coming into this area, this was Apache country. And the Apaches were very warlike people. They even fought among themselves. And they didn't like the white man coming in. They didn't like us much. And so what that meant is that the early white settlers that came in here, they were all pretty trigger happy. They were all armed to the teeth. They also did not consider the Apaches to be human. They considered them to be in the level of coyotes. And so for a long time, they would shoot them on sight. I'm sure the Sasquatch people knew that. And so, you know, we were wild-eyed, crazy, trigger-happy humans. And so the best thing for them to do would be just stay away from us, ignore us. And there are a few stories that came out from the early settlers here, but not as many as you might think. But the presence of them, of course, they were here. They've been here for a long time, long before we came. They're an older species than we are. Changing topic a little bit, let me talk for a minute about the wood knocks. Now, they don't walk around carrying clubs. The wood knock sound that they make, we're not 100% sure how they make that, but they have the ability to mimic a great many different sounds. I've got a number of stories about them mimicking sounds. But they don't walk around with a club. If you go out in the area that we go into, the predominant tree species is ponderosa pine, which is a softwood, and it's pretty hard to find one of those that'll make a good wood knock sound anyway. So and I've made wood knocks and gotten answers back immediately. Well, I know they don't walk around carrying a club, so how did they do that? Well, they make that sound. The rock click sound. The Apaches say that the hairy man will click two rocks together. Well, what we think that is that's part of their language. Part of their language involves clicks and pops. And there's a lot of people, campers, that have heard sounds during the night, and they say it sounds like rocks clicking together or popping sounds. Well, what that is that's probably them, and they're conversing back and forth among themselves, and the part that you hear is the clicking and popping sound. And that's a sound they make. What kind of other sounds they make? Well, we've heard them make machinery sounds. We've heard them, my partner had him playing tricks on him one night, and they made the sound of his wife's truck starting up in the middle of the night. And he thought somebody was stealing the truck, and he ran out there, and of course nobody was in the truck. It was locked up. And he knew what was happening, so his thing was to laugh and say, "Okay, guys, you got me." But they make all kinds of strange noises. We've heard them making human sounds. We were at Crazy Town one night, and the little ones were there messing with us, and they were making little wildcat sounds. They sounded for all the world like little human kids trying to sound like wildcats. They're going meow, 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 and there'd be about 10, 15 of them doing that all at once, from one side and then behind us. And then they started barking like dogs, and then they started oinking like pigs. And, and we knew none of that stuff was there. And that was just their way of telling us that they were there. And, but they can mimic a lot of different sounds. If you're going to do what we do, the very first thing you have to do is, a lot of it is mental. It's getting your head in the right spot. First of all, it's extremely difficult when you've been taught something is a certain way your whole life to come to grips with the fact that everything you've been told your whole life about that is wrong. And as I said earlier, it took me a long time to come to grips with that myself. So the very first thing you've got to do is you have to open your mind to the fact that they're there. The other thing, and we've heard this from them many times, and what they are looking for is they are looking for people with an open mind and a good heart. And they can see your intent. They can look into your soul, so to speak, and they can tell. If you're a good person, they know. If you're not a good person, they know that too. If you're thinking that you're going to befriend them and then all of a sudden one day you're going to show up with an elephant gun and shoot one to prove they exist, they're going to know that, and you're never going to get anywhere with them. You have to do things on their terms. They're in charge. They will tell you what they want you to know when they want you to know it. They will feed you little bits of information as they do it. Sometimes they'll even give you what they term knowledge drops, and sometimes they'll do that while you're conscious and know what's going on, and sometimes they'll do it while you're asleep and you don't know what's going on. But I've had times when all of a sudden in the morning I woke up knowing something and I didn't know how I knew it. There's no way I can prove to anybody that happened, but there's also no way that anybody can prove it didn't. It's very easy when you start hearing voices in your head, it's very easy to question whether or not you're going crazy or not. And trust me, I've been there. But finally, I had it happen enough times under controlled enough environments, and it happened to enough of us. And it happened where we'd have 4 of us get the same thing at the same time, at the same instant, that we knew that we weren't coming up with that on our own. It was something that was being told to us. And when we finally opened up our minds to accept the mind speak and started accepting it, then we started getting it. I have them come to my house fairly commonly, not all the time, but commonly. I've had them been driving down the highway, and all of a sudden I can detect the presence, and I reach out in mind speak and find that there's a bunch of young ones sitting along the highway watching traffic go by because they like to do that. And that's happened in several different states. I've also run into situations, most notably up in Idaho in 2021. We pulled over. We're up there with our truck and travel trailer, my wife and I. And we pulled over to a big pullout because she needed to use the little room back in the trailer. And so I was standing at the foot of a heavily forested hillside, and I kind of just reached out and I said, "This looks like a good spot where you would live. Are any of you here?" And I got a very blunt return, and they said, "We don't want to talk to you." Okay, that particular group, for whatever reason, they didn't like us much. And they answered, they acknowledged they were there, but they told me on no uncertain terms they didn't want to talk to me. And I've had that happen other places as well. So every family group will have its own personality, if you will. I know of several places where they don't like humans, and they basically, I had a guy here not too long ago. I investigated one where a guy was hiking and he started up a little hill, and he got told in mind speak in no uncertain terms. He said something told him, a big powerful voice told him, "Get off my mountain." So what did he do? He turned around and left. They don't universally like us. Could they harm us? Yes, they could. Have I heard the stories? Of course I have. Everybody's heard the stories. My personal experience is that they're very spiritual, they're very loving. They may try to intimidate us to achieve whatever goal they're trying to achieve. But if they wanted to hurt us, you could have a very large one literally walk up to you, and by the time you realized what was going on, they could rip you apart. I'm living testament that hasn't happened. I've spent a lot of time sitting in the dark and with them all around me, and I felt more love from them than I've ever felt hatred. That's just the short version of my story. I have a YouTube channel as well, and I invite you all to come and check it out. And my channel is just my name, Chuck Jacobs Arizona. It's not totally a Bigfoot channel, but there's a lot of that stuff that's on there, and I welcome all of you to come and visit.